CBS News Miami special report.
Good afternoon. I'm Lauren Pastrana here with Jim Berry, and this is a CBS News Miami special report. As you see, former President Donald Trump's plane arriving right now live in South Florida as he is here to answer to federal charges related to his handling of classified documents after he left the White House. These are live pictures right now from Miami International Airport, where the former president has just touched down after taking off earlier this afternoon from New Jersey. He was at his resort in Bedminster, but now he is here in South Florida, expected in a Miami federal court tomorrow. For now, though, he will spend the night in South Florida at his Trump Doral Golf Resort. That's where he will go from the airport, where a group of supporters are already gathered awaiting his arrival.
At this unprecedented moment in American history, and Miami is right smack dab in the middle of it, as you can see there, the president's plane taxiing there. We expect him to get off the plane briefly. And this, of course, set in motion by the bombshell that landed last week, a 49-page indictment unsealed last week accusing the former president of violating the Espionage Act, of obstruction and conspiracy. 37 counts in all. He is accused of taking documents that he shouldn't have and then refusing to return them to the federal government. The indictment also accused him of carelessly storing them around his Mar-a-Lago mansion, where employees and private club members could have seen them. The indictment also goes on to say that those classified documents were left in an office, a bathroom, and a ballroom. But the former president, though, is maintaining his innocence and calls this indictment the latest chapter in a political witch hunt.
Yes, and just to give a little breakdown as to what's going to be happening here over the next 24 hours or so, because this is going to be a quick trip. This time tomorrow, former President Trump will likely be arriving at the federal courthouse in Miami for that court appearance scheduled for 3 p.m. We're expecting it to be a quick one. It will be federal court, so no cameras allowed. We will have a reporter in the courtroom to bring us the details of exactly what's happening inside, but there will not be any sort of live video stream from what is happening inside of the courthouse. Then we are told he will return to Miami International Airport to board his plane once again and to fly back to New Jersey, because even in the midst of all this, former President Trump is still running for office yet again. Nothing, not these charges related to the Mar-a-Lago case or even the New York case in which he was charged earlier this year, stop him from being able to run for office. So he is expected to be back in New Jersey by tomorrow to give a speech at 8:15, where we can only imagine he will continue to rile up supporters, because from the moment that it was announced that he was going to be indicted yet again, he sent out a fundraising message to his supporters. So he is clearly using this as an opportunity to rally up his base and get them geared up for this upcoming election.
In fact, it was the former president himself who broke the news about the indictment last week. And in a 4-minute statement, he said that he is innocent. And he again said this is a weaponization of the Justice Department. Of course, that is something obviously that others see very, very differently. But as we see the former president's plane here with the Trump label emblazoned on the side, slowly taxiing, and we expect to see the former president here deplane very briefly.
We are going to be taking some live pictures and live looks from other locations across South Florida in a few minutes. We do have our own Jim DeFede standing by with lots of insight. I'm sure he'll answer so many questions that we might have, as you mentioned, Jim, in this unprecedented moment, a federal case now a former president has been charged in. So we do have a lot of questions to see what's next and how this is all going to unfold here in the next 24 hours. We also have a crew at Miami Police, because we are expecting some pretty intense security over the next 24 hours or so at the courthouse and even in Doral. So Miami-Dade Police also involved in protection. U.S. Marshal is going to be involved in protecting the courthouse tomorrow, as well as the Secret Service, because as a former president, the former Trump does, allow him to be protected by the Secret Service as well. So this is clearly an occasion that a lot of people are going to be watching. A lot of people want to know what's happening, and that's why security has been ramped up in anticipation of this event.
Matter of fact, about an hour ago, we heard from Miami Mayor Francis Flores, who said that he respects the right of people to protest, but he expects that it will be done peacefully tomorrow. And he says that it is going to be all hands on deck for the Miami Police Department, and they are ready to mobilize support from other police departments if as needed. And so, of course, obviously, he hopes that it is going to be peaceful. But as you mentioned, Lauren, already, many of the former president's supporters already showing signs that they are very riled up. We have no idea how many of the former president's supporters might turn out tomorrow and might protest either in Doral or outside of the federal courthouse tomorrow.
Interesting that you mentioned Miami Mayor Francis Suarez. His name has been bandied about a bit as a possible GOP primary contender for former President Trump. He hasn't officially thrown his name into the ring yet, but even those who have officially declared that they are running for president for the GOP nomination against former President Donald Trump have actually come out in support of him in these last couple of days, showing how perhaps the entire party is trying to rally around him, because at the end of the day, he is still the front runner. Our own Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, he issued a statement on Friday on Twitter, basically saying that his administration, if elected, would never sort of support this weaponization of the federal law enforcement. He says that we have for years witnessed an uneven application of law depending upon political affiliation, and he wants to know why the Justice Department has been so overzealous, in his words, of bringing these charges against former President Trump, when, in DeSantis's opinion, other people from the opposite political party, the Democratic Party, should have also garnered charges for their alleged infractions. Also, former Vice President Pence has come out in support, saying he was deeply troubled to see this indictment, as well as Nikki Haley, Trump's United Nations ambassador. She is also a 2024 presidential contender. She said that this is not how justice should be pursued in our country. So he certainly has support, even from his opponents. Yeah, and Pence, who obviously was his vice president, did also say, though, that no one is above the law. So he's trying to straddle the fence a little bit there. Chris Christie is about the only one who has really come out swinging at the former president, saying that this reflects some irresponsible conduct on his part. As we see some of the security already in place there as we await the former president's departure or deplaning from his private jet there. And as you mentioned, Lauren, this is going to be a quick trip, but it could be a very eventful one. Yeah, it's only going to take, I'm assuming, just, predicting the route that they would likely take, 36th Street all the way to 87th Avenue. So from the airport to 87th Avenue in Doral, a straight shot shouldn't take too long. I imagine police and law enforcement will be blocking off perhaps some of the intersections to make this as quick as possible. We do know that people have been gathered outside of Trump Doral for a bit today, throughout the day. And earlier today, I was able to watch as Joe Gorcha was interviewing one of President Trump's supporters, and he says that he feels, and that other supporters feel, as though this indictment of the president is not just an attack, or rather the former president, is not just an attack on the former president, but also an attack on his supporters, Jim. So they are actually taking this very personally. We see it looks like they've pushed the steps up to the plane now. So any minute now, it appears as though former President Trump will deplane, and it looks like they've got an SUV waiting, so he perhaps will just hop right in. I'm not sure if he's going to take any moment to address any crowd there. I don't believe that a large one is built up, because he's likely anticipating more of his supporters at his resort. Right. In fact, we had heard that there would be reports of a big flag-waving rally outside of Trump Doral, where the former president is expected to spend the night. And as we see some people now coming off the plane, and we're waiting actually to see the shot of the former president himself, as he is here in Miami. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., he is due to be arraigned on those 37 counts laid out in that 49-page indictment, which was unsealed last week, accusing the president of allegedly mishandling classified documents. And some of the details, of course, disturbing to a number of people. Some of the details include the former president allegedly showing some of this sensitive information to a political aide and even an author. Yeah, by now people have likely seen the images on social media of the boxes upon boxes stacked inside of bathrooms, in a bathroom behind a shower curtain. So this is the evidence that the Justice Department has, built up in this case against the former president. We, of course, are going to be learning more about that as, the weeks and months go on. In his previous case, or in the other case that's happening concurrently, but it's in New York, and he was charged and indicted earlier this year. His next court appearance isn't until next year, March 2024. So it is likely that this case would also stretch well into election season next year, and that there may not even be a resolution before the election happens. We're going to talk to Jim DeFede hopefully in a little bit just about the logistics of how that will all play out and what all these different charges mean. Jim also has some really great insight as to what the courthouse will look like tomorrow, what we might actually be able to see, because if you've ever been to federal court, a lot of those buildings are connected and you don't even see people going in and out. So it's very possible that we won't see Trump enter. If we do, it'll be because he wants to be seen. That's he wants his supporters to see him. There is an underground entrance there, so you're right. He can certainly go in and out without being seen by anybody in the public view. And as you mentioned earlier, Lauren, this is going to be an interesting case in terms of just the logistics of handling security, the handoff from the Secret Service to the U.S. Marshals, local authorities involved, and then back to Secret Service while the president is here in South Florida. Just taking a look at all the people who are exiting the plane right now. I've counted probably over a dozen, perhaps more. So he's traveling with quite the team. I imagine it's his legal team, other supporters, other aides, people who are able to, keep him on schedule, because it is a tight turnaround. Everything he has to do here is very well timed. He's got to be there at the courthouse, I'm guessing a little bit early from his 3 o'clock court appearance tomorrow. So just 24 hours a day from former President Donald Trump appearing in a Miami federal courtroom. Right now, let's turn things over to Jim DeFede. Jim, thanks so much for being with us right now. I'm sure you've been listening as we await the former president deplaning here at Miami International Airport. What are your thoughts on this unprecedented occasion?
Well, I think unprecedented is the appropriate word. It's historic. One of the things I've been looking for as we're watching these live pictures to see who's coming down the steps is whether or not his body man, which is somebody who serves at his, helps him get cokes and carries bags and that sort of thing, Walt Nauta, who is also indicted in this case. Indicted because Donald Trump allegedly instructed him to remove boxes and hide boxes, before the FBI executed their search warrant. So, Walt Nauta, I know, was at Bedminster yesterday. I don't know if he's traveling with the president, but the two of them have remained in lockstep ever since. So that's one thing I'm looking for. But let's talk about the security that you've been referencing. We do expect the former president to go right from the airport to the Trump Doral, where he is not expected to leave this evening. He will stay there overnight and then get up and then early tomorrow afternoon drive into downtown Miami. Now, as you said, the U.S. Marshal Service is responsible for protecting all federal buildings and courthouses, and will actually take control of Donald Trump once he arrives at the courthouse. Secret Service will turn him over to the marshals, which will process him. He'll appear in court, and then he'll head directly back to the airport, where he'll fly back to Bedminster tomorrow afternoon. Now, in terms of security outside of the courthouse, well, that really does fall largely on the city of Miami, and we watched that press conference earlier today with the Miami police chief and the Miami mayor, and I got to tell you, there were some concerning moments in terms of how serious they're taking the possibility of a threat. They are not designating specific areas for people to protest. They are not, for instance, creating an area pro-Trump and an area anti-Trump. They're just sort of letting people mix and mingle. They don't know how many people are gonna attend. I mean, it could be in the thousands, but they're not sure. They're not setting up any hardened barricades around the courthouse, that would suggest trying to keep people off the federal grounds. So it could get interesting tomorrow. Then again, in talking to some local law enforcement sources who are involved in the planning, they also say, parking isn't great downtown Miami, and with the afternoon storms people are used to, they may not get a big turnout. But I will tell you this, we saw one flyer from one group that claimed to be bringing 4 busloads of protesters down from Orlando. And if you've got 4 busloads coming from Orlando, who knows how many are coming locally. So it's going to be an interesting moment to see how the city of Miami, along with Miami-Dade and the Florida Highway Patrol and FDLE, handle the security around this event, because I expect the president to get in and out fairly easily. I mean, Secret Service and City of Miami can block off roads and get him in and out. It's what's going to happen downtown Miami that's going to be interesting to sort of see in the hours leading up to, and then probably more importantly, in the hours immediately after Trump leaves the building.
Yeah, Jim, you're right. And that point about the weather, perhaps Mother Nature might provide an assist in keeping things under control, because it is summer here in Miami, and those afternoon storms could roll in, and that could tamp down the crowd a bit. Jim, let's talk about what exactly will happen in the proceedings tomorrow once the former president arrives.
Sure. So this is going to be quick. This is just an initial court appearance. It should probably take no more than 15-20 minutes. I mean, you go in, as I said, the U.S. Marshals will do all the things that they do when they process someone who is surrendering. They will fingerprint them. They will take a picture. They will maybe even take a DNA sample. I'm not 100% sure on that, but often they do. We will never see that mugshot unless he's convicted and sent to the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Then it would appear on the BOP website. But we will never see a mugshot. We will never see any of those fingerprints. As I said before, there are no cameras, as you point out, no cameras inside the federal courtroom. The closest we're going to come is, I would imagine there are going to be a good half dozen courtroom sketch artists hired by different outlets who are going to try to capture that moment for history, very much like you saw how it was captured when Manuel Noriega was put on trial. The images from that trial are all entirely from courtroom sketch artists. So that's what we'll likely see tomorrow.
Former President Trump is now exiting the plane. He appears that he will walk directly into a waiting black SUV. The door is being held open for him. He's walking down alone. He did a quick wave there. The gentleman behind him is also, I'm trying to see if he's going to get in the car. No, he is shutting the door, so the president just got in the vehicle alone. Now that man is getting into the front seat, but he did walk down the plane steps to the waiting vehicle by himself. Former President Donald Trump now on the ground here in South Florida, about to start making his way towards his Trump Doral resort. So a quick trip across 36th Street to 87th Avenue in Doral, assuming that is the route that they take. That's usually the quickest way. So do anticipate some traffic in that area. If you know anyone heading out, could be a slow go. You could have to pause for a police motorcade. Perhaps it's going to be blocking off some streets.